Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Nico Farah, and we are at the Gaming, Media, and Entertainment. Our second panel discussion is a very interesting topic of merging XR, which we're all very excited about, but now with the physical aspect of entertainment and the theaters. So we have an amazing panel of technologists and producers. Please help me welcome Kira Benzing from Double I Studios, Scarlett Kim from Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and amazing moderator Chris Pfaff as Chris Pfaff Tech and Media LLC.
Thank you. Nico, give it up for Nico.
Thank you.
She warms this room. And now that you're warmed up, that's a theater term for those who don't know, we're going to get right into it. Some of you may have seen different iterations of this panel. This is we've been doing this for 4 years in real life and many great virtual sessions. The players have changed. Sadly, we were not able to have the brilliance of Pip Brignol from the round today from London because he's racing around. So we wish him good luck. And Blair Russell is about to mount a show off Broadway. That's great theater. Give it up for Blair. His replacement is the amazing Scarlett Kim from Oregon Shakespeare Festival. She's the Director of Innovation and Strategy. And of course, Kira, many of you know as a producer and a founder of Double I Studios. And the way I like to start this is, my mantra is show me, don't tell me. So we will start with some material, some content from both Scarlett and Kira, and then we'll dive into our discussion. And don't go away, because we will take some questions with you. Yes, we will. So without further ado, Keith, can you roll the content? Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Scarlett. I don't know if I can replace the brilliant Blair Russell, who is awesome, but
yes, you can.
we're all here at the intersection of Theater Heart XR, which is the shirt I am wearing today. So I'm Scarlett Kim. I serve as the Director of Innovation and Strategy at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which is the largest repertory theater in North America. Repertory theater means that we have many shows kaleidoscopically of all kinds, ranging from classics to new work to plays. For the past 2+ years, we've been incorporating XR and the Metaverse into our repertory. As you can see from our OSF 2023 banner, there's all kinds of definitions of theater and the future of storytelling. Next slide, please. Oh, maybe one before. So Quills Fest is our flagship program. It is a festival at the intersection of immersive technology and live performance that we launched 2 years ago to really celebrate new work that focuses on artist mobility. So in the past 2 years, we've created paying positions for around 1,100 artists, commissioned and presented around 72 projects, really focusing on XR newcomers and creating meaningful bespoke relationships and partnerships between the theater world and the XR world. Next slide. So as part of, waiting for the next slide. So as part of Quills Fest, we built the Quills Fest VR world in Unreal. So it was modeled after the original Elizabethan theater, which was a raucous and debaucherous space for social and political mayhem of all kinds. Some of you may know that you throw rats on stage as a way to respond to the performance and the actors. So the origins of theater is actually as this already beyond the four walls. So that's kind of some fodder for us to think about. Some people think of the kind of formalized, very spectatorship-based theater that some of how we might define theater as what it is, but actually the origins of theater is quite immersive to begin with. So we built the Quills Fest VR world. We commissioned artists to contribute immersive, interactive, original music instruments, avatars, and so many other projects. So let's go to the next slide to share a little bit about a couple of the projects. So many of the projects are defined by unclassifiability, kind of like, oh, this project is exploring theater and XR, but how it does it is uncategorizable. It does not fit into existing labels of how we think about work. So this is an example of that on a quad. Just kind of a game, interactive story, VR theater piece, exploring the Anishinaabe tale of a bear ritual. Next slide. O-Dog, a volumetric VR experience featuring Black Thought from The Roots. Next slide. Buki 88, which was our original Avatar commission that featured incredible collage of West African motifs with technofuturism. Next slide. Ordinary Gesture, a VR theatrical experience that surrealizes the experience of empathy. So this is all kind of bespoke language that the artists are using, most of them new to XR, to talk about their work. Next slide. Guardian of the Night, a VR experience that immerses the viewer in a forest where they're guided by spiritual guardians from the West African mythology. Next. Loom, a VR opera that ruminates on the emotional and political charge of polyphony and ethnic identities. And Hella Iambic. So this is our most recent project that we launched last week with the incredible Glow Up Games game studio. You may know them from the Insecure game, which was a game that went with the HBO series Insecure with Issa Rae. So this is a second screen mobile game experience that is meant to be played during the live performance of Romeo and Juliet. So we gave audiences a gamified experience of interacting with all the tea and the side-eye of Verona during the performance. And finally, this is some moments of the Cymbeline project, which was a 10-episode series on Shakespeare's Cymbeline, which is known as a problem play, just because it's uncategorizable. It's neither a comedy or a history or a tragedy. And each episode featured guest artists from all kinds of disciplines. We had interactive video, we had very analog handmade puppetry, we had VR, and all different kinds of modes of storytelling with digital technology. So this is a couple of our projects that we have done at OSF, and I'll pass it over to my wonderful colleague here, Kira, to talk about her work.
Thanks, Scarlett. That's fantastic work, which we will talk more about in a minute.
Thank you, Scarlett. I love what Scarlett was bringing up about how the work in its earliest days and where our origins were coming from, the audience was actually very interactive. So feel free to just shake in your seats and relax yourselves today and interact
And
with
by
us.
the way, if I didn't mention the title at the top, if you're in the wrong room, stay. This is XR in theater. The Metaverse smashes the four walls, and as I usually say at the top, you are usually scolded and admonished to turn off your devices when you come here. In this new world, we imagine, turn on your devices. And the password for the Wi-Fi is find AWE, if you don't know it. Kira, sorry.
Wonderful. So we have been creating emerging narratives with emerging technology for years. And my work first started off in the documentary film world, but it was hybrid in its essence, pulling in my theater background since I trained at Lambda. And then it was wonderful to get to have an opportunity to cross more deeply into XR technology. So when we started to shift into XR in 2015, we had a dream of creating a multiplayer platform, bringing audiences, live performance and performers and audiences together. And what you just saw on the slide before was our performer, Lisa Sanaya Dring, from our virtual repertory theater. So these are things that we continue to expand as we are growing the lexicon of what this emerging art form is. This is a production that we did called Love Seat, which we premiered at the Venice Film Festival. It is a hybrid production where our actors were performing simultaneously to a physical audience and a virtual audience. So they were crossing between both of those mediums and worlds. And we built out a physical theater at the Venice Film Festival, as well as the virtual theater. We had some connection between our audiences there and different forms of interactivity. Some of our core principles at Double I Studios are social connection, interactivity, our work is story-driven, and a sense of liveness. So you'll see that in all of the threads of our work going forward. Next slide, please. This is some imagery from a show that we ran called Finding Pandora X. This is in the shape of a quest story. So it is not a hero's journey, although we love those stories and we write those too, but this is a quest. It's a branching narrative where our audience chooses to follow Zeus into the underworld or Hera into Futura City. Within those worlds, there are these escape room style games, and the audience has to work together. It's built on the principle of collaborative gameplay and participatory gameplay. And these are some of our favorite things to do. We wanted to push the limits of the storytelling. We hadn't seen any other work created like this at the time, and we're always trying to do that. We had written this show, we were starting to develop this show when we were at Venice just after Love Seat, but we didn't intend to distribute this so soon. This came as a result of what was happening during the pandemic, where we felt that there was a lack of social connection. Audiences wanted to come together. We had Broadway performers reaching out to us, asking to work with us, and to try to find a way where we could start to bring new audiences and performers in and educate everyone together at the same time. We're all ready to go on this journey into these virtual worlds. Next slide. This is going to take you into something that we are playing with now, where we are going back to some of our roots in augmented reality. We had worked previously with Erasmatech and image recognition AR, as well as Bose spatial AR. And so this is taking Finding Pandora out into the physical world. So it's creating an interactive narrative where we can layer these possibilities and extend the virtual into the physical, and then return back into VR. So that's a new form that we have been playing with. Next slide, please. This is a show that we ran. It first started out as R&D for Meta. This is in their platform called Horizon Worlds. We've built across many of the social VR platforms over the years, having done R&D with High Fidelity, Philip Rosedale's wonderful company that came out of Second Life. Then we worked with AltSpace and VRChat, and then here, social VR with Horizon Worlds. This is a variety show. It's attempting comedy in VR. We think it's possible. It was very fun for us to build out an ensemble of performers. And you might know that in Horizon at the moment there aren't legs, but we built them. So anything is possible in VR, right? So see the can line going up at the top in the left corner. Next slide, please. And lastly, another piece that we have been working with, and if you just play this, it should be a video that should play. This comes from the WebXR Awards, the Pollies, where we created the Ombudsperson tribute for Britton Heller this year. And this is some volumetric capture that we did with DepthKit and their awesome technology. Here we're playing with a more stylized version. I have a lot of strong beliefs in what identity looks like and how it doesn't have to be photorealistic in VR. And so many of you might be familiar with our production of Run-In, which we ran on the largest volumetric stage at Intel Studios, but it's been really great to get to work with more volumetric technology, and we look forward to continuing to do that. Off to you, Chris.
Great. First of all, thank you. Please give it up for... this is really just a taste, a soupçon of their work. And I met Kira 4 years ago through Brandon Powers, who's also been on these shows before, as somebody who is doing virtual choreography and dancing. I've also participated in Pandora X, essentially as a member of the chorus. And because my Quest 2 battery was dying, I actually fell into the chasm, which I thought was the most virtual theatrical thing possible. I mean, it was very Shakespearean. And I invite you to connect with them to do this. One of the things that I think really makes this idea of virtual theater is something that both of you talk about, which is liveness. Explain what that means to you as a director and how that conveys that, this really interesting tension with the technology between the audiences.
My definition of liveness has been changing. So for many years I was a purist, which was that I defined liveness as our performers and our audiences sharing space and time in the same room. Now, Scarlett and I might have some thoughts about what a room looks like, what that even means, that it doesn't have to be a physical room. So we can talk more about venue and what we think of theater in that sense. But I believe now that liveness can happen even if there is a recording, but the audience is live with that recording. There has to be, I think, a communal aspect in that space instead of a more intimate one-to-one, but my definition is shifting these days about what liveness can be.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I feel like Kira and I have been on a multi-year expanding conversation about what is liveness, and I think that the pandemic has really accelerated that question and line of questioning for the theater industry. I think folks define it as synchronicity sometimes, like you said, or shared experience, meet space, all kinds of different definitions, but I'm personally really inspired by liveness as being an emerging and iterative concept. I was talking with someone about how theater, when recorded, people are like, well, that's not theater. It betrays liveness 1.0 as we know it. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Like music, when the recorded forms of music first started emerging, perhaps similar discussions were had. But theater, when sound design first came about in the theater world, it was very controversial. People thought that it was eroding something away from theater as we knew it. But then now, of course, we can't imagine a theatrical production without sound design. So I think all of these questions are generative and an exciting way to redefine liveness in the most anti-purist way as possible.
Yeah, and I think that if you go back to the grand old days of Web 1, and I was working on a project with Bell Labs with Gertrude Stein Repertory Theater and Yale Repertory Theater and the St. Petersburg State Academy of the Arts. And we were using a multi-point system that we called Montage at the time, and the whole idea was to do these rehearsals in a virtual setting and even try to take actors in virtual remote ways. And because bandwidth being what it was, you had to essentially go back in time to, like biomechanics, something very early 20th century, kind of relearning theater from early 20th century to late 20th century or even early 21st century. I feel like what, we see today is reminiscent of that in the sense that you can take these technologies and as artists really bring them into a work that, back to what Scarlett was saying, is unclassifiable. And yes, you can go back 400 plus years to Shakespeare's time to see how new elements were being brought in. But I think that this begs a question or even a statement, which I would like your responses to. This week, I have seen people, and I won't mention their names, who are on stage who are saying, well, I'm just an artist, or I didn't really know the technology, or et cetera. And that doesn't really cut it anymore. I think that the tools are so available, and there's so many people like yourselves and others who are, over the last even 4 years during the pandemic, are coming. How do you bring, for example, I think it's a great story that you should tell again, since you alluded to it. How did you bring name Broadway actors, people who are in the firmament of New York theater, who really, are maybe closer to Luddite, into this world where they're suddenly at the vanguard?
Well, I think what's so special about this field of XR is that so many of our backgrounds can play a role in the development of this technology and of this new form of storytelling. And what was great about the actors that have come and reached out to us to work with us, or that we've worked with casting directors to find, it's been exciting to see how their different journeys of life. I think even an actor isn't just an actor. Some of them have trained, some of the actors that we've worked with have trained deeply in puppeteering or mask work, and all of those things have an incredible relationship to the work, as well as performers that have a good sense of their body and movement that really relates to what we're doing.
Right,
So,
and I think inherently that brings some of those more analog skills into the digital world. Scarlett, one of my old high school theater buddies, Jonathan Topo, has been the fight director at OSF for many, many years. I can imagine some great swordplay and other things in multimodal presentations. What's your take on this blending of the digital, analog, artist, actor?
I think theater artists are experts of storytelling, liveness, immersion, agency, all of these things that are really becoming more and more vital in the metaverse. So I'm really passionate about creating a supportive pathway for theater artists to be able to mess around and play with the sandbox of XR. Of course, there's so much that feels scary and inaccessible and gatekeepy, so I think it's really important as a theater and performing arts producer to be able to create those channels. And sometimes, and I also am seeing a trend where theater directors are now recruited by game companies. Now, theater performers are often branding themselves as multi-hyphenate performers across all forms of reality. So I think all of that is very exciting.
I mean, this is 15 years ago, it would have been the same person perhaps putting transmedia producer on their resume. God bless them. But I think that this is interesting too, because of course we haven't yet even mentioned what Fortnite was able to do during the pandemic, remind people or introduce people, same with Roblox, to these virtual worlds, which are not necessarily Horizon worlds. They could be anything. They could be even more open. But, you know, Scarlett, it was something we were talking about is, you know, you have a very proud regional theater company with a great name. How do you take that brand into the virtual world? Because I mean, you're doing both heavy lifting, but also you're painting on an open canvas for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, I think as OSF, OSF is an 89-year-old theater. It has been a kind of a container for the future in that it has been an innovation leader for the performing arts industry for a long time, before technology, like in things like how do we think about ASL and live performances. That's something that OSF really workshopped. So we actually had a great opportunity to model new blueprints for producing this kind of work. There is no paradigm of touring blended reality, location-based XR experiences. Like whenever I try to talk about projects like that, it feels so untenable, but some of the most exciting parts of my role has been modeling pathways for new kinds of producing in partnership, producing across platforms, you know, so that it can now go into the field. Did you find
that you were introducing OSF to some people, I mean, who'd literally never heard of you?
Absolutely. I think, and the theater world is going through this reckoning of having trouble connecting with Gen Z, for example, or the international audiences. I think this work really opened up OSF to both partners that it would have never thought that it would call peers in different sectors and industry, and also audiences that had no idea and thought we were just doing Pumpkin Pants Hamlet in the park, right? So.
And that's okay. I mean, in the sense that a younger generation, a rising generation, emerging generation, whatever term of art you want, would have an experience that they call their own, which maybe the word theater doesn't even enter into it. And that's not to erase what we're doing, but I think that we have to respect that. I mean, Kira, you know, you are working with a lot of different companies to essentially, I mean, create something that lives in a space in a New York environment and a global environment. And I think that's key, because your work, not just because of Venice Biennale, has brought international awareness, and why? Because it's virtual.
It's available, right? We can, and this is the exciting piece. We can cross time and space with this technology, and we can open up these worlds to an international audience. One of the most beautiful things that we saw with Finding Pandora X is our audiences coming in and not speaking English, speaking different languages: Korean, Italian, Japanese. It was so beautiful to see, because we built into the production, since everything's built on top of game engines in this industry, we have the inherent opportunity to involve interactivity and game mechanics. So if we do that with our audiences and we prompt them in different ways, we can enable this kind of collaborative participation from the audiences, and they don't have to speak the same language. So we would see them try to offer up to each other to help solve the puzzles, and it's so beautiful.
And it's an amazing thing, because I think that we're seeing a shift from sort of this top-down idea of what, let's just stay with VR for a second. Hollywood got out of the VR for PR game in 2017, and so then you had a lot of people who were just talking to each other at studio lots who were, you know, unemployed, essentially. And then you had Sundance kind of abandoning VR. Next week is Tribeca, for those who are in New York, like me. We'll see what that's like. But to me, I mean, you're going to a virtual theater festival tomorrow, right, in LA?
There is. Kira and I will both be at the Next Stage Immersive Theater Summit in LA, which is another kind of entryway and framework into all of this. But I mean, in collaborating with the Glow Up Game Studio, we talked a lot about cinema envy, actually, how all of these immersive and interactive forms, like what is the relationship to film? And there seems to be this like hegemonic hierarchy between film and all other forms and the value of art, and how do you think about that? I personally think I always question why XR was first aligned with the film world, because to me it's theater. So I'm always thinking about like, can we actually look at XR as a form of theater?
And to me, I agree with that because, of course, the game world is more theatrical. When you talk about MMORPG, you think, well, people have characters, people have avatars, people know what space is, they know what time is, they know how to manage things. I think, you're going to find stage managers who are like serious gamers who won esports awards. It's like, oh yeah, well now I have my, and by the way, the Tony Awards are this weekend. But I feel like there should be a virtual theater award show that I'm going to say it here now, so I'm going to challenge all of us to push for that. And we won't know where it is. It'll just appear somewhere. But I think that the idea of both of your companies having this amazing brand, but it's also repertory. And of course, Kira, you started this virtual repertory company a couple of years ago. And I think that's fascinating. Talk a little bit about that.
That was a long dream, and there's a lot of dreams, and sometimes you get around to building some of them. I think during the pandemic, it was a perfect moment because we had so many theater performers looking for something different. So instead of us saying, why don't you try a headset on? They were saying, what is that thing that you're doing of VR? Can I put a headset on? And then we had the wonderful opportunity to partner with HP, which helped us ship equipment around the country. And where I'd been training actors physically in a live space with 4 walls prior to the pandemic, I thought, well, can I take my process totally virtually and work with actors remotely through Zoom and then into VR? And can this work? Can I get them comfortable without setting the headset up for them and logging them into their accounts and helping them calibrate? Can I now teach them and empower them to become technologists in a way? And will they override the discomfort of working with all this new tech in order to find the tech as an extension of their body and let them be fluid into the art form? And it worked. I mean, we trained a whole new troupe of actors for Finding Pandora. We built out that cast. We had rotating actors for that show. And then we also expanded that into Horizon Worlds and trained a group of new actors, also discovering the medium and finding what was possible. And I think having a lot of joy with the technology and not being afraid of it.
I mean, who's going to tell them no at this point? Because we're all wondering what will happen, with Apple. But I think the bigger question is, what happens in the ecosystem in terms of the accessibility? Because one of the great things, again, not to stand up and cheer for SARS-CoV-2, but without that, we wouldn't have had so much, brilliant use of not just the technology, but also the networks, because we take great technology for granted when it really works well, and yay, USA, our networks were really rocking it hard. But also the power of our mobile devices. So there's so much more accessible technology, and the availability for people like yourselves, and also some big companies to fund that. I feel like these actors can find their voices the same way, if you go back to the 30s, actors were pushed into radio, and what a great way. Let's talk about some basics here, and this is particularly for the audience because some of you may not have experienced some of these things before. How do you actually, let's start from the beginning. How would you cast? How would you? You talked about blocking a little bit, but how would you put this together and really shape this? I mean, are you looking at certain actors who you think would be better for a production? And you've got some named people. I mean, on both of you, including you certainly have great availability of talent. I mean, take us through a little case study or an example. Like, for example, with Finding Pandora X. I mean, how did that start? How did you actually get to your read-through or your rehearsal process to actually putting it up?
Finding Pandora X wasn't meant to exist. That was a show that we were developing as a longer series, a trilogy piece, and we didn't intend to release that show for a much longer period of time, but we had so many people writing us in saying, can you open up the world of Loveseat? And of course we built Loveseat on the wonderful platform of High Fidelity, which had then changed their distribution and plan just after we had run that show. So I think, like so many of us making art, as we work with tech that changes, or we work with platforms that shift, we have to find a new home and find a new land and build more walls again, right? Even though we want to break them down in this land of virtual storytelling. So it's been quite a journey. I feel like with every production, we're kind of rediscovering what it means to start again. And there are parts of our process that can repeat, but other parts that don't. So what was exciting about finding Pandora is we knew we wanted this, protagonist, a strong female story about this character, rediscovering her myth. This is something we're still writing, but we wrote that as a quick reaction and answer to try to help open up audiences to the virtual world, because so many were saying, please open the doors. And the world of Loveseat was so tiny, it wasn't exploratory in the way that we wanted Mount Olympus to be. So we built 3 worlds for that show, and that whole show was created in just under 8 weeks, so it was quite fast.
It's an incredible build, yeah.
I think, I think a lot about curating and commissioning because that's primarily what we do. Like, I think around 80% of our work is original world premiere commissions. And I think about how we think about value of classifiability, because so much of our work is about unclassifiability. We only primarily do work that does not fit into a single label. So my most important question in that process is asking the artist, what is a story or an experience you can only tell or create in XR? And I find that to be a really imagination-sparking question and a prompt for live performing artists who are new to VR, because for example, there was an artist who was telling the story of his experience at an internet addiction camp, and we supported that process. A story he can't tell in China, right? So there's that level of like, I can only tell this story in XR. There's also an artist exploring volumetric for the first time. The project I shared with featuring Black Thought. It's like, well, that story of Black Thought performing as a version of Othello in the LA riots, it's a perfect story to explore volumetric technology with, because it's all about kind of this overwhelming sensation of being a protagonist at the center of this chaotic and intense historic event. So it's, what better is it than volumetric to actually explore that? So really, like, what does the artist need? I really think about centering the artist and championing the artist at every step of the curatorial process.
That makes more sense, and I think it goes back to something that you were both saying earlier about how this is not cinema. Okay, and we're not here to bash film at all. That's not the point. But I think that the real issue is that you're creating this mega ecosystem, and particularly with OSF, because again, you've got such a fertile kind of lab, whether it's Quills Fest or some of these other things, to bring people into new forms of collaboration as well, which I think is really fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about distribution. We touched on the global side of this, but what's the process for both of you right now? And since we do have this great global opportunity, and not least of which is here at this show, which for those who don't know, does have a European component, and I think there's an Asian one. I chaired a track in Munich 4 years ago, so we're all part of this thing. But where do you think in 2024 the global sort of XR theater distribution pipeline looks like?
Yeah, I can start off on this. Redundancy has been really key, actually, in how we think about distribution. Most of our works are available as WebXR and in person and in headset, and that has been really interesting to think about, because theater is so much about you move towards this product and it's one singular thing and you all arrive. So it feels a little bit almost sacrilegious to think about distribution in a pluralistic way, but that has been really important, of thinking about multiple entryways into the story. And I say this to the artists that we commission all the time, of you don't have to decide in the process whether this is going to be a VR thing or whatever. Like, you can actually engage in an iterative process, and we can tour it as an installation. You can have a web version of it. We can make it into a 2D film. Like, all of these distribution pathways for a single kind of world existing, I think, for me, is really exciting artistically, but also it addresses the kind of audience engagement problem that we talked about of the theater world. All the formality and the kind of elitism associated with the coming to the theater, that is not so compelling and exciting and accessible to a lot of people, right? So all of this pluralistic view of distribution, I think, really addresses the access problem.
Well, the shirt says it all for those who came in late. Theater loves XR, and I think XR loves it back, and particularly when you can really boil this down to something that maybe doesn't have theater in the world, but gamifying all of this, I think, is also key. Talk about that, because, again, Skits and Giggles to me was just brilliant, and to me that VR is inherently funny to begin with. So I think that's a great ground for somebody who maybe doesn't want to get up on a stage, but is very comfortable riffing in the virtual world.
We have an opportunity, I think, with VR and XR to try different things and to break down the barriers. We have an opportunity to appear differently than we might want to from our physical bodies, as we can put on these avatars and arrive in a different way at these productions. So I think it's been quite beautiful as we can get the audiences in. The catch, I think, in terms of relating it back to distribution is, how do we get more headsets in hands of people? How do we find other ways to reach our audiences so that it can be even more accessible? Because when we do bring in these other audiences, they are engaging with it in such a different way than live physical theater in the most traditional sense.
So, yeah, I mean, and I think the price point now, if you saw the Quest 3 announcement, obviously thinner, more powerful, decent price point. That would have been a game console 20 years ago. I mean, it's still discretionary, but I feel like this is a much bigger opportunity for somebody to learn, which gets into the education question. Now, Scarlett, I mean, you're a Lambda graduate, Kira, you're Cal Arts. I went to Northwestern. These are all, elite institutions in theater. But I feel like that the power of what you're producing brings it all home for people who are digitally native.
Totally. I mean, I always, whenever I get a chance to speak with college students or grad students, I always try to say artists are entrepreneurs. And as theater artists, you actually, right now is an incredibly exciting moment for you to practice theater across industries. And I think sometimes it's challenging to, it took me a long personal journey to kind of come to that of I don't have to be a starving artist for the rest of my life, or choose between starving artists and selling out, whatever that means, right? As theater artists, you can actually do it all, and you can create new paradigms.
You're a shapeshifter.
Shapeshifter. Kira calls herself multi-dimensional artist, which I think is so inspiring.
That is so Star Trek. I just love that.
No, I wanted to mention specifically about education. I mean, two things that I'm feeling really a lot of passion around right now is we launched the XR and Metaverse workshop for high school students, visiting high school groups. A lot of people on the West Coast, their first experience with theater is by coming to OSF, and it changes people's lives all the time. Of seeing we just did a queer punk rock musical. How transformative is that to someone who has never seen anything like that, right? So XR Metaverse workshop really geared towards hey, you're already doing theater on your phones and in Roblox. It's not this thing that's outside of your life. It's something that you're already doing. And secondly, we're really investing a lot in education and support for artists to go into the digital economy, getting access into Web3 tools and NFT tools and all of that, so that they can think about new ways of building empowered relationships with institutions. So these are two things, education-wise, I'm passionate about.
Wow, and kudos to you for that. And Ashland is not easy to get to, so the fact that you're bringing people in and you're reaching out to them is please give a round of applause, because this needs encouragement. Kira, what's your sort of statement on education in this XR theater world?
Oh, I think it's huge. One of the things that we like to do on our productions is to try to train people up with us on our shows. So whether we're training up a new stage manager or a board operator behind the scenes, we want them to learn as many facets of the production that they want to. And we see some of these artists go on to create their own work after, and we're so excited to help that grow. So definitely, I think that we have to keep growing this ecosystem. I think Quills Fest was a perfect place place for so much of this, because not only did OSF bring collaborations together, you also created the virtual space that we could go to and unite as a community. And those spaces are needed. I think that's part of the distribution piece.
Exactly. The theater, of course, is a community. It is a global community. It is vibrant. And I feel that these opportunities, particularly through a virtual portal or any kind of meeting place, really brings it all home. And the fact that Discord, which was really just belonged in the gamer realm, is now something that everyone from voiceover artists to everybody in the theater is using. And in fact, I think the theater is going to take over Discord. Or just bring all of this together in a beautiful way, because, of course, as I've said, the power of this thing in my hand keeps increasing. The MIPS keep increasing, and it's both Moore's law and Metcalfe's law and whatever we call the digital theater law. But I wanted to get to the question about audiences. What do you think the audience has learned through these past 4 years? I mean, let's start from this incredible moment where you're awarded the Venice Biennale with Love Seat. Pre-pandemic, suddenly people are really awakened to this. And what do you think they've learned? Because, of course, we're not the only panel. We're the best panel on this topic, but we're not the only one. Sarah Ellis was waxing rhapsodic the other day. For those who don't know, she's the digital director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. Whitten Frank's in the audience somewhere here. There she is. We've got some other folks who are plotting their trade in virtual theater. But what do you think the audience has learned, and what have they given back? Because this is an interactive medium. I mean, they're not just sitting passively or texting, Uber Eats before the end of the first act. So let's start with you, Kira, on that question.
I mean, I think our audiences have learned so much. Just like our theater artists, they're becoming empowered as well to learn how to use this technology, learn how to have more agency in these productions and these worlds. I think once they're exposed to the possibility of virtual theater, they're then able to explore more of VR and fall in love with it. One of my favorite things was South by Southwest. We had 2 audience members come up to us and say, I bought this device in order to come to your show, but now that I see what is possible in VR, I'm not going to return it.
Oh, wow. I really hope you got some free coupons from Meta for that. Maybe you can buy some digital swag. But they owe you big time, because who knows who those 2 people are going to become. And that's the audience that we love.
And they're going to go see more shows, and they want to engage more in this community. We also taught our audience how to fly. Our hope was, how do we, in a pandemic, do something more? We polled our audience. They said, if we could give you one superpower, what do you want? And they said to fly. So we built in a flying mechanic. We made it really easy. We took Whitten and her team behind the scenes and spent time with them, with our engineers, talking through some of these things. They flew with us. They flew above the land of Mount Olympus.
Come fly with me.
Exactly, a little Michael Bublé. So I think these are empowering things, because it is what takes us beyond the physical realm of what's possible. And if we can just keep opening audiences to these possibilities, it will help everything grow, the entire industry.
Yeah, I mean, my colleague Mayan Teo talks about, how do we create communion, not consumption? And that's kind of like the neon sign in my brain, and thinking about audience engagement. I stopped using the word audience, because I feel like it inherently, sparks kind of this binary relationship. But I'm like, how can we be co-conspirators? How can we be participants of a ritual together? Has been really like an important guiding principle. The other thing is intergenerational dialogue. I think my recent fun anecdote was with Hella Iambic, this phone experience you're supposed to have during the show, like very offensive to a lot of people. Received a lot of hate mail about this. Really interesting, because people...
I would be so proud to receive hate mail for a work of art. Yeah.
So it was an interesting experience of people, it feels very taboo to take out your phone. It feels very disruptive, but
I told you to take it out, so
I know,
you can do it now.
So they came to the show, a lot of these people, with this preconceived notion. But then after the show, a lot of people came up to me and said, maybe this is not for me, but I can see how it is like actually a more intuitive way of accessing Shakespeare for my kids or my grandkids. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't have to be for you. Like, not everything has to be for everyone, right? It's so I thought that was a really powerful moment of it can actually be a tool for people to bring their kids to the theater, or vice versa, kids to bring their parents to the theater, or whatever, intergenerational.
I like that last bit too, because of course, again, whatever that experience is, and I think that it's not just the accessibility of let's say a Quest 3 or whatever Apple or anyone else comes out with. I think it's just that level of creativity to say that we can play, we can fly, we can play, and that's what we do in the theater. And I want to talk about this because, of course, you're a nonprofit, and art likes funding. Funding does like art too, but there's something that we've talked about a little bit, and you've got a lot of data, of course, from OSF. This idea of putting together material is saying that you're creating jobs in this XR theater world, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about it as artist mobility, right? Taking artists from one industry or sector to another. And then we started talking about it as economic growth, and that was really like an exciting unlocking of framework. We created, I think, something like 1,100 paid positions. We also, when we look at our race and ethnicity and gender breakdown, we're really focusing on BIPOC artists. We're really focusing on women and gender expansive artists.
And by the way, I was introduced to you through Lauren Ruffin. Big shout out to Lauren Ruffin, who's a black woman in, I think she's still in New Mexico.
Yes,
right?
at ASU.
Right, and I mean, amazing. And a lot of us wouldn't be here at all if it weren't for Nani de la Peña, speaking of ASU. I just will say this before this ends. I've been a longtime member of the Producers Guild, which is 53% women, but I feel like the leaders of XR, and this has been true for many years, are mostly women because there's no glass ceiling in the virtual world. You can quote me on that. Now, I like to believe that that's true, but it's going to take a lot more pressure applied for that. But as you can see, look amongst you, many of the leaders of this space are women. I think some of the best stage managers I've known are women. But I think that it's certainly the money has to respect that, and we need more women funding this work, and certainly, as you mentioned, a more diverse funding audience as well.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that is the nonprofit world, which is where I've lived mostly, it can be very purist about how to resource and support artists. So one of the things that I'm most proud of and excited about continuing is how to create innovative partnerships between the nonprofit and for-profit world. It sounds like utopic and very doable, right? Very challenging in the context of the nonprofit world. There's a lot of calcified systems that is meant to block the distribution of wealth. So really excited about having more of those conversations. Nonprofit, how do we think about the structure? How can we actually center the conversation around holistic artist support? One of the most exciting funding pathways that we discovered is we've been calling it trust fund, but it's how do we actually pay for an artist's life? We commissioned an artist and she was like, I actually need a roof. So we gave her a roof. That was what this artist needed in that moment, and that was her commission.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. That shouldn't be an issue, particularly given the fact that this generation of artists are technologists and vice versa. So, this is nothing new. I set up a program between Bell Labs and the Brooklyn Academy of Music that ran for 2 years. It was from 98 to 2000, and it took 2 years to get off the ground. But, for those who don't know, there was something called Experiments in Arts and Technology that Billy Kluver, who was a Bell Labs engineer in the 60s, and Robert Rauschenberg and others did, and they had a very famous series of shows at the New York Armory. You can Google it. That to me, that was just that's the paradigm for me. And I think that we now see this every day. You don't have to go to a highfalutin gallery to do this. We can do this anywhere because it's virtual. We're now at the moment where I can open up the mic, Keith and others or whoever's. Where's Farah? Where's Nico? Nico Farah has the mic, right? And because this is being recorded, I don't want you shouting out until the mic comes to you. But because this woman has the coolest hat in the entire audience, she's right in the front here. It's a red hat, and she'll receive the mic and ask her question.
I want to thank you all so much because this comes the closest to my fantasies about VR, particularly when I first experienced it like 10 years ago.
I will kiss you open mouth later.
But and also, so I'm going to ask you later about whether I can get it on my headset. But so one of my fantasies, when I first was exposed to VR, is like, wouldn't it be wonderful to watch Hamlet and after the to be or not to be soliloquy, be able to stop him and say, are you really going to kill yourself, and have Hamlet answer? And I suddenly realized, well, with generative AI, you could actually have him answer in Elizabethan, in Shakespearean, in iambic pentameter. So I'd like to know, to what extent is that happening?
Thank you, first of all, for the great question. And we didn't get to the generative AI, so please give her a round of applause for that. Now you don't know this term, or maybe you do, but that she is now officially a prompt engineer. Yes.
I mean, Hella Iambic, the mobile game project I mentioned, is we're talking about the next stages of it, incorporating generative AI and also augmented reality elements of it. But we actually hired a rapper to write all of the choose your own adventure branching narratives. So when Mercutio dies, spoiler alert, in Romeo and Juliet, there's a ghost of Mercutio that comes back that you can interact with, and it's a whole path that you go down on. But it's like I'm excited that we have this chief rap officer in residence with Glow Up Games who's writing this. We have a CRO, and it's like, how can AI actually be a tool that we create to use to kind of create more and more possibilities? But the last thing I'll add is, I think my graduate thesis was Hamlet, and I was always very like, what does it mean? Hamlet felt like a container that I could not occupy or have access to. Like it seems kind of on a pedestal on the top of the hill somewhere, right? So I think it's really exciting to use XR to cast people in these roles or these stories that people have not been able to see themselves in.
This is a great question. By the way, I have a colleague who's working on an iambic pentameter bot. Seriously. So I love that question.
You haven't mentioned this until now. That's so great.
That's why we talk offline, babe. Okay, next question. Wait for the mic.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi. I have questions mainly about how you deliver audio in both your,
and I love you too for that.
Live settings in terms of delivering immersive or spatial audio, and then how you do it in the headset.
Carrie, you want to take that first?
Sure. We like to work with spatial audio designers when we do our work. For Finding Pandora X, we worked with Seda SB Proctor, who worked on spatial audio design and has an incredible audio design background. So that was really great to have her artistry involved. It's when you're throwing yourself into these immersive roles, it's so easy to forget about sound and audio, and it is incredibly powerful, and we have to think about it early on in the process designing for it. And then, of course, when we're working physically in the physical space, if we're doing a hybrid show like Love Seat, then we're working with audio mixers, and they're mixing between both worlds simultaneously. So it's quite a feat, and we usually have a double team.
So, and by the way, right there is Mirko Vogel from Vaudeville Sound in Vancouver, one of the leading immersive sound designers on the planet. So just saying, if you want to talk to him about that later. Next question. Yes, go.
Hi. So going back to the piece about education, I'm really curious about what is the gap between the technical skills necessary to create XR and the artistic skills. And I'm saying this from a selfish perspective because my primary interest in theater is direction. And I'm wondering, do I need to learn how to design? Like, how do I actually bring direction into XR?
Great question.
Design is helpful. I think the tricky thing is the industry keeps changing and there are new tools available every day. And so it's hard to keep up with all of the tech. It's hard to be a master of all of it. So I say just look for the pieces that inspire you the most and try to learn some of those aspects and then bring what you know. We all have different journeys. It's how we find our way into this space. So you just take what is true to you and your core and bring that into the art.
Yeah, and I think my degree is in theater directing, and I was always kind of both empowered by and wrestling with the generalist nature of my trade and my craft. I really have come to love it and celebrate it because it means that I can kind of have my hands in all of the sandboxes, and I'm always going to be a student mindset kind of person towards the world. But I mean, that is one of the big challenges. Whenever we matchmake between theater artists and creative technologists, we try to set up the collaboration so it's not like the creative technologist providing a service to the theater artist who's the primary artist. I'm like actually really frustrated with that default. So I'm like, how can we actually think about new ways of
and
collaboration?
I think that,
Like an ecosystem.
yeah, and I think that this is something that we're going to see very soon. All sorts of institutions, whether they're from community college to the top of the top, teaching this blending of skills. I think that you'll see more people who are even electrical engineers or computer scientists who will be pushed into the arts and even the theater arts, and I think vice versa. I think it just makes sense because the fact is that the broader economy of where all of this goes, of where all the networking, of all the integration of technology goes, is heavily dependent on us creating these new genres, whatever we call it, whatever that term of art is that, we used to call that theater. Well, it's still theater, but it's now the megaplexosity or something. I don't know. You can steal that one if you want. But I think that seriously is what it takes, and it's not just, that's a nice little thing that you took some design or you took some theater. I think it is so integral, and it's something that is. I know that it is happening in parts of Europe. I'm sure in Asia, and I think we need to light a bigger fire here because there's so much firepower in this room. I think we have time for one more question. You, sir.
Yeah. How many audience members do you think should a virtual theater have? I know technically it could be unlimited, but what do you think is a sweet spot so it's not becoming overwhelming and the performer can interact with the audience?
Well, as long as they're paying, we'll take an audience in the millions. Thanks. Yeah.
I think, our largest physical theater is the Elizabethan Theater. It has 1,200 seats physically, right? So it's interesting, and I'm like, in virtual theater, obviously, as you said, the possibilities are unlimited. And I think we've had a chance to really think about the most experimental as being the most pop. We started working with Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of the amazing book Emergent Strategy. She's writing a musical. And we're like, what if we make an app where people can sing with Adrienne? That is like my childhood dream come true. And like, because it's actually a synchronous but individualized experience. I imagine that having like millions. Like I would love if that had millions of audiences. Whereas some of the like Anaquad, a very intimate story like about this folktale, indigenous folktale. We intentionally put one audience in that experience at once. It's a very, I think, incredibly powerful solitary journey. So I think the elastic spectrum is so great, but there's also technical concerns about what it means to have audiences in the same space.
I think it's not a one-size-fits-all deal. I think each production and each story dictates what type of space and number of audience it wants in it. And if your goal is to design for the thousands, then you're going to write that show in a different way than you would if your goal is to design for 6 in your audience, where there is a lot more of intimate interaction. And I think those things can change.
Yeah, and you can tier it. I think you can get very creative in terms of how the networking capabilities are, particularly if you're doing live. Ultra low latency, we have a client, Nanocosmos, that just did an event with 10,000 live for the future of investing. And they do a lot of iGaming and gambling and betting and auctioning and all sorts of stuff, because those interactive components, as you said, are critical, but you could have different tiers. You might pay a higher ticket to have a certain level of interaction. You might get more effects. One last thing, Lawrence Fark, shout out to him. His group Techno Dramatists did a show during lockdown in January of 2021. They had live actors at the Gene Frankel Theater in Tribeca in New York, and live musicians with original music. And I was part of 95 people on Zoom, and they were using AR Core and AR Kit effects. It was very low budget, and it was just brilliant. It was a Tristan Zara play, from the 20s. So surrealist play done in this virtual setting with interaction with a Zoom audience. This was on Zoom. It's amazing what you can do. And the irony is those 95 of us, I think that Gene Frankel Theater is like 99 seats or something. So, it's amazing. And that's just one aspect of it. But I think that the more you want to write in those things and how you direct and build, it's like the sky's the limit, literally. I think that's our cue. Right, Nico? Are we at time? All right, we're going to go. The curtain
Thank you
comes
so
down.
much. Please give them a strong round of applause for Kira, Scarlett, and Chris. Such an important topic in this emergence of these technologies with our traditional culture and history. Please continue the round of applause, and they will be around towards the back of the room if you have any question.
And if you want to buy us around later, we will. So for those who don't know, Kira Benzing from Double I Studios, give it up. Yeah.
Woo!
Scarlett Kim, Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Please give it up. I'm Chris Paff, Chris Paff Media LLC. We'll be outside and we can take your questions, interactions later. Thank you again. Thanks to AW and thank you, the audience, because ain't no theater without the audience. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everyone.